Yes. Yes, I did that.
Okay, we are good to go.
Let's start.
Yes.
Okay, just a second. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session of Engaging with the LGBTQ plus community, Healthcare Under the Rainbow. I hope this session will be useful for you all. I'll start off by introducing the organizing committee. Firstly, we have Jasprit Kapoor. Jasprit is the president of IMAMS in Maharashtra and currently a final year medical student at Mayo Medical College, Pune. Next, we have Rishi Dhamecha. Rishi is a third year medical student at JNMC Vardha, is a member of state PRC team and the best boy as we call him at IMAMS in Maharashtra. Lastly, I'm Sudhi Rangari. I'm the tech and PRC head of IMAMS in Maharashtra and I'm currently a final year medical student at Mayo Medical College, Pune. That's about the organizing committee. We'll start by introducing the panelists. First, we have Dr. L. Ramakrishnan. Dr. Ramakrishnan is a public health professional and vice president at Sathi, an NGO working on inclusive healthcare, justice, and social protection for communities marginalized on account of gender, sexuality, and HIV status. Then we have Dr. Samira Jahagirdar. Dr. Samira is with the Department of Critical Care Medicine at Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Research Institute, Pondicherry. A transgender person, Dr. Samira is a part of the gender care team offering gender affirming procedures at MGM CRI. Then, last but not the least, we have Suvrita. Suvrita is a gender activist, queer affirmative psychologist, full time therapist, and a special educator, currently associated to PODA Group of Schools, Practo as consultant, and also does her private practice along with holding pro bono mental health workshop for young people. That's about the introduction part. I think we are good to go. Let's start the event. So we'll be talking about how to take history for the LGBTQ plus community. We'll be talking about their health issues such as physical and mental health, and we'll be talking about how to reach out if you're confused about your own sexuality. Are we good to go? Okay.
So who'll start first?
Samira, over to you.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Samira, you're audible.
Okay, fine. Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thanks for the introduction and happy Pride Month to all of you. Those who belong to the community and not and are as allies to this community. Um, as the organizer has rightly said that we'll start up with how approach should be there for any LGBT clients when as a doctor when any such client comes to your contact, how you deal with it. Okay, so basically when we talk about history taking, we talk about communicating. So we lay down or we learn about or how to communicate with any client which comes uh, in contact with healthcare practice. So I'll be talking about my personal narratives and experiences, what I went through as a transgender person. Okay, when I came in contact with healthcare system, not my hospital. Yes, to some certain extent, yes, my hospital also, and at the same time, or uh, when I was undergoing gender affirmative procedure journey all throughout 10 years, the whole decade, what all experiences I had. And we'll pick up the cues about how and what are the common mistakes which happened when, um, the history taking or how do you talk with client. So I'll be specific with transgender client and later on Dr. Ramki will give some video demonstrations where the other LGB component also gets highlighted. Okay, so first and foremost important thing when I started self-identifying as transgender client, somewhere around transgender person somewhere around in 2008-9, where I decided that I slowly want to go ahead with my gender transition procedure. So hardly any facility was available in my own institution where I was working, and so does I started seeking for options which are where are those options which are available. So the first step comes is getting in contact with mental health professional. Okay, so how and what I should be, where I should be going, what will happen. I was absolutely not aware with whom I should be getting contact. Luckily, that I am a doctor. One of my psychiatrist friend who started interviewing me, and because he became a very good friend and there was a bias, so we decided that no, my exploration of gender identity and coming up to a term that how I should go ahead with gender transitioning, uh, he will not be a good person to help me out because there will be a lot of bias in taking up the decisions. So we went ahead with searching for some other gender affirmative, gender inclusive or gender comfortable mental health professional who can guide me up. Believe me, I searched myself at least 10 mental health professional in and around Chennai. I could not find anyone. People were not knowing, first of all, what to do with me. Okay, how and what way to start up. Few people they were used to say me that okay, you are just whatever you are narrating is something which is usual thing. You are cross dressing, that is something which is very common. Few of them they say that it is abnormal. So it started that they were giving, first of all, they were not clear about their own basic knowledge. So most important thing is that mental health professional or doctors should be clear about what you are dealing actually with. Are you clear with the terminologies? Are you clear with what kind of clients you are dealing with? Have you read about it? Have you understood about it? And if yes, then you can start up with some open and broad questions rather than going bang on judging that particular client that no, as I said it up that no, what you are doing is wearing girls clothes in your childhood is something which is like normal in our culture where boys, mama's boys, they wear, or for function's sake, moms, they do make their children wear about girls clothes and take photographs and all. So that is what I do not want to get judged at that moment. And I walked out. So many such OPDs I walked out. So non-judgmental way of approach to the client is something which is very, very important. All right. So that is the first point came into the picture. Listen to what client is saying. Many of the time it happens that your client might be better educated in terms of gender identity or gender expression or the gender issues. You may not be having much amount of knowledge. Okay. Um, yes, you can have that reverse mentoring happening at that moment. And in any case, you feel that you are not capable of taking care of your client, you need to be very much honest at that particular moment and can say that I am not aware of it. I can get back to you very well and very easily. Understand that one size does not fit to all. Okay, do not try to bring your heterosexism and that particular heterosexist attitude you, at a slightest point if you think that you are a transphobic person, you are not comfortable, please get away. Do not try to do the moral policing at that particular moment. Second most important thing is, uh, I'm when I went there, everybody started telling me or talking with me as Samir. Okay, nobody asked me, nobody said it to me that what you feel inside you to be addressed at that particular moment itself. I very much wanted that. To be addressed as with a female gender pronoun in the OPD itself, though I was sitting in front of them in pant and shirt. Okay, during that time I had beard, facial hairs, my hairs were short. I was not on any hormone. I mean, full blown hormone therapy at that particular moment. So my physical changes were still are of depicting of male gender. Okay, um, but very much to get comfortable, to have that psychological connection when I'm sitting in front of one on one with my mental health professional. Definitely I wanted to have that, to get addressed as Samira. Probably I was not clear at that moment whether my name should have been Samira, but my mental health professional can definitely ask me with what name you want. If not clear with the name, at least with the pronoun which I would like to be addressed and I would be comfortable. So the history taking part, like how my typical medical history, like how past medical history goes, like what way I was, how I was, my childhood history, those part were pretty much okay, all right. There was no issues related to that. Fortunately, the psychologist was quite attentive, patient. There was, all even the non-verbal communication cues were also very much well put up. Like for example, she was sitting right in front of me. There was no objects in between us. uh, Phone was switched off. Full on 1.5 hour, whatever the conversations were happened, I felt that I was getting connected with her, and there were no distractions at all. During this time, hardly any interruptions were there. I was allowed in the first meeting itself to heart out and tell out without any judgments. And whenever she was not understanding, she was giving me the cue and trying to clarify herself, her doubts. Okay, rather than putting up judgmental questions at that particular moment. At any point, she did not assume anything. Whenever she had any confusions, she stopped me for a brief period and tried to clarify me what she wanted to tell it. So I had 3 sessions. I was very clear with my, gender identity by the time I reached third session, and I went ahead with getting mental clarity and put up on the paper that unfortunately 10 years ago still ICD-11 was not clear that, and it was labeling as gender identity disorder. So my the final word on the paper came as gender identity disorder. But what was more important was I was mentally prepared. What was written there was I was mentally prepared to take any kind of decisions. What was inferred at that particular moment was I was suffering from anxiety or transient anxiety at that anxiety disorder at that moment. I knew that it is natural because I was going through a hell lot of different kind of journey, and I was anxious about it, how I am going to be getting treated all throughout these years. So definitely I'll be anxious at that particular moment. There was nothing new about it. Unfortunately, a lot of psychometric analysis and tests I had to undergo, which Suvitra will be talking in short more about it, the rationale related to that. My second and third visits, which were happening with the mental health professional, I felt that at least the subsequent visits, the receptionist who were sitting outside would have, addressed me with what I wanted to. Like when they call up, yes, Samir, next is you. You can go inside. Rather than that, gently they can say it off. Please, you may go inside. Doctor is waiting for you, or something like that. Rather than if I'm, understanding that that communication would have happened between the doctor and the receptionist, specifically for people who do not want to address with their gender pronoun which they were never comfortable about. So once my issues got sorted out with mental health professional, I was fortunate enough that I started up with very renowned and very good experienced endocrinologist. And here is a very positive example about how an approach should be of endocrinologist before starting up the endocrine procedure with a transgender client. So the first and foremost important thing happened is with her is Dr. Usha Shriram is she was very clear that how I should be addressed. Okay, so that was such a comforting thing. The first important thing she said it up that I know, I understand that at this moment you would like to address me, what way you would like to address me as. And I was very clear and I said that, ma'am, you can say me as Samira, and with a pronoun as she. Okay, so that was the first important connection I had it up bang on. And that is what a strong patient provider connection started up. My faith was totally been put on my endocrinologist. I got very easily connected with her. All right, so that was the first and foremost important step. Like it was a win-win situation for developing a trustworthy relationship between two people there. The next important thing, she was absolutely clear that we know that hormone therapy, when we start it up, most important thing comes for any trans client is fertility issues. Okay, saying and giving advice about fertility, whether you would like to. We know that when you start hormone therapy, um, there will be some problems or some changes in your genitals. Testes or ovaries are going to happen, and your fertility is going to get weaned off or going to stop for some amount of time till your hormones get kicked in. So these are potentially reversible things, but if you reverse it off, we are not sure that how much amount of fertility capabilities you will be having. So what are the options related to that? That was very well explained. At the same time, once fertility issues were sorted out, the next important thing was about what hormones will be doing to me, what are the pluses and minuses, what physical thing it will do, what it will affect my psyche, how my mood disturbances will be there, and how and what way I should be coming for further follow up. That's it. The first visit itself was so comprehensive. I got the whole picture was clear. I did not ask any other questions. Next further visits, whatever I had it up all throughout my 8 years of connection with her, was absolutely non-medical talks. We were absolutely clear in the first visit itself. Like whatever talk I had it up was what I should have been telling to my mental health professional. I did not need any kind of mental health support during this 8 hour period. She was the one with whom I can talk. So rather than my physical aspects or physical changes, which she used to examine me, and that is how that examination part used to be taken care of, and she will tell that what all physical changes are there. But what mental thing, simple things which I was needing in to be addressed, like for example adjustment issues, mood changes because of hormone, the fights, the relationship issues. And she was like a comprehensive person which was available. And a brief amount of period spent on that particular compassionate listening, what she did it of was more than enough. So many of the time, as a client, I had I was knowing about it, what are the solutions, and just I wanted my professional to listen to me very patiently at that particular moment. So that is what something was very, very important, the patient listening from the professional. um, there was not much sort of sexual history being taken at that particular moment by ma'am. At that, probably that was not related, and though we had it up like few amount of discussions related to what all changes happened with the libido of transgender person when they are put on hormone therapy, and how a sexual function will be, how what way the intensity will vary, and all those questions were explicitly discussed at that particular moment, and she was clarifying all these doubts all throughout. So at the end of almost like 6 7 years, my journey went very well, and at a point I was clear with my endocrinologist that I told her that the next thing is I have taken a decision that I would like to go ahead with my surgery. So again, surgery is an extremely important point. Taking it's a decision where you lose your genitals permanently. It's a non-reversible procedure for any transgender client, so you should be absolutely mentally prepared for that. So again, I had to go back to the mental health professionals, two different mental health professionals, go to the same grid. Okay, Suvitra will be touching upon that, and come back to the surgery OPDs where we had a conversation. Doctor made very clear about it that I will not be my sexual functions, my genital anatomy, how it will be, what are the effects, how the perioperative recovery is going to happen. Do I have any questions and queries related to healing of genitals? What the immediate surgical care has to be. All those issues were discussed. Now, mind you, this is absolutely core, surgical, and how a surgeon is going to deal about it. But what about the hospital? What about the nurses? What about the attenders, the technicians? How and what way I should be expressing, how they should be communicating with me. So there were a whole lot of points which never got discussed. So surgeon decided at that particular moment that he will deal with his own part only. But what about the other components of the hospital? Okay. Now I was fortunate that I got this surgical affirmation done in my own hospital where these plastic surgeons, they came to my institution and they operated on me. So I had an opportunity with the help of my gender care team, and me being the first client of that particular institution, what protocol I designed, I walked through that protocol in a stepwise manner. So it gave an opportunity for me even to sensitize everybody. I still remember that when I got admitted in in the ward, um, till that point they were addressing me as Samir sir. Okay, so the first point I had to tell me that no, at this point onwards I would like to be express myself and address as Dr. Samira, and this is what you need to be talking with me. And henceforth onward, any such condition, any such person comes, please ask them what you want. I understand that you have come for gender reassignment surgery, and with what pronoun and what way you want me to be addressed as. I still remember my genital preparation where it was done by a female staff nurse, and I was very clear about that. That I told her that you need not have to be, hesitant about it in touching my genitals and taking care of my genital preparation part. And yes, that eased out to the staff nurse also. So that intricate communications which happened between me and my staff nurses to lose out her anxiety that what a transgender client or person feels So it is nowhere related to the physical anatomy, what they bear on their bodies, but what is it there in their mind. A simple conversation, I had it up in a pre-anesthetic clinic with my anesthetist colleague that yes, surgeon will be taking care of genitals, but when you take care of a female client, when you are anesthetizing, you take care of covering of the breasts, okay, the chest part of your client. Treat me that at this moment I am not your colleague as Samir, which you are associating me past 10 years, a whole lot of decade. At this moment, when you see my body exposed under anesthesia, when I am sedated and unconscious, I would like to be treated with the same intensity and the same way. So these were some very important points which I brought it out, and that was a learning lesson for them. So post-operative care, dealing with the anxious people around me, they were not knowing how to address, calming them down, my postgraduate students, how they should be addressing with me. So again and again, appropriate addressing of transgender people, that is what something is a clue. If you do not understand, ask them, make them comfortable. If you're comfortable, naturally the whole lot of conversation will go absolutely smooth enough. That's it, what I would like to stop here, pause here. Hello.
Thank you, Samira. Thank you. Now I would like to ask Ramki, could you please share the video?
Yeah. Thanks for this opportunity. Before I share the video, I have a couple of slides that I would like to share, and let me try to get that done. So I request Samira to turn off her video if possible. Yeah. So I gather that the facilitation team has put together some excellent material which was shared with the attendees a couple of days before by WhatsApp. So I'm assuming that all of you are familiar with the basics of sexual orientation, how it's different from gender identity and different from gender expression and sex characteristics. So in follow-up to this knowledge that I assume you already have, I'd like to make a few points, which is that when you're talking about LGBTIQ affirmative care, it's not that the patient will come with you always and it'll be like they have a badge or something written on their forehead saying I'm a member of the community. Because of the existing stigma and prejudice against people of a different sexual orientation or gender identity or people who are intersex, a lot of people may not even reveal that they belong to the LGBTIQ community. So the first and foremost thing is, don't make assumptions about people's sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics based on how they look. Like how Dr. Samira was saying, just because she had facial hair and was wearing stereotypical male clothes, the healthcare providers are not to assume that she's male. And so it's always best to ask right in the beginning. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that all healthcare providers come from a culture and society and community or religious background where, sexual orientation and gender identity that is not mainstream may be considered a disorder or it may be considered a sin. But as healthcare professionals, please wear your scientific hat. Be aware that the medical research community is increasingly recognizing that sexual orientation and gender identity are not pathologies. Homosexuality was depathologized in the 1990s by WHO. And as Samira said, what was formerly called gender identity disorder up to ICD-10 in WHO, the International Classification of Diseases, has been moved out of that categorization, and it's only there right now as gender incongruence. And further, the only reason it's there in ICD at all is because insurance providers typically want an ICD code for processing an insurance claim. So be aware that as far as scientific evidence and medical evidence is concerned, there's decades of evidence now that these are not pathologies, that there are LGBTIQ people who are perfectly well adjusted in society. They have no psychopathology. Additionally, some of you who are not current with the times may also do well to remember that until 2018, same-sex sexual behavior was considered a crime regardless of whether it was consensual or non-consensual. But since the Supreme Court verdict, which is called Navtej Singh Johar of 2018, if it's a consensual relationship among adults, it's not considered a crime. Okay, so there are, as the readings may have suggested, there are several areas where public health professionals and specialists and primary care providers need to be alert to the specific needs of LGBTIQ clients and need to keep in mind that the client may not necessarily self-identify, and you have to elicit it through gentle, non-invasive, sexual history taking or other kinds of probing. So whether it's primary care or endocrinology or mental health or gender-affirming surgeries or STI and HIV or people working with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer or geriatric and palliative care, in all of these contexts, unless the person states upfront that they belong to the community, you may do well not to assume and then ask. So traditionally, if someone went to a gynecologist, the question saying, are you married is typically supposed to be an indicator of are they sexually active, and the assumption is that they are sexually active with a man and their orientation is heterosexual. But as we are going to be seeing right now in a video, you really have to let go of these assumptions. Okay, so if you look at WHO's classification of health systems, there are several areas of health systems which need to be made inclusive. If you're looking at human resources, whether it is a medical, nursing, or other paramedical curricula, training of all cadres of healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, auxiliary nurse, midwives, ASHAs, lab pharmacists, etc. All these cadres need to be trained on LGBTIQ issues because there are chances that they will come across clients in their practice. Similarly, if you're talking about service delivery, everything from having institutional policies, having a gender-neutral restroom that transgender people can use if they so choose, to having communication materials like in outpatient rooms that have signage that says, we are welcoming of everybody, regardless of gender, sexuality, race, religion, caste, etc. And also the kind of health literacy materials put out has to be inclusive. And also areas that you might not be concerned about right now, like financing, healthcare financing that typically governments worry about, have to think about things like insurance schemes to cover transgender needs. And maybe a lot of companies, corporates right now are including same-sex partners of gay, lesbian, and bisexual people in insurance coverage, etc. So there's many, many diverse ways in which health systems need to be inclusive. Okay, so I'm going to start off with this video. A little bit of background to the video is it's developed in the country of Uruguay by healthcare providers in partnership with a community organization called the Black Sheep Collective. And it was designed as a didactic tool to train doctors on LGBTIQ issues. The video is in Spanish. It's got English subtitles. And I'm going to be playing only one case study. This is a case study of a doctor meeting a client and asking about her history. And there's a 1A and a 1B. So 1A is a scenario where the doctor doesn't really know or doesn't really think about LGBTIQ issues. And 1B is a scenario where the doctor is sensitized. Okay, so let me see. The problem. Let me try it again.
Conceptivas, que son las que dan acá en farmacia. Alejandra Pérez. ¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes. ¿Edad?
32 años.
Bien. ¿Por qué motivo consultas, Alejandra?
Papá.
Bien. ¿Estás en pareja actualmente?
Sí.
¿Y qué método anticonceptivo usas?
Ninguno.
¿Hijos? ¿De qué edades?
Uno de 2 años y otro de 8.
Bien. Bien. ¿Cuál fue la fecha de tu última menstruación?
Ayer.
Ujú.
Ayer me vino.
Bien. Relaciones.
Okay, I'm sorry, but there's a problem in playing of the video. Are people able to hear me?
Ramki, you're audible.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. I think there's a streaming issue, but let me summarize the video for you, and then I'll share the link so people can watch it later. So here is a woman who goes to a doctor who asks her if she's in a relationship, and then immediately asks her about why she's come there, and she said she's here for a pap test. He asks her about her history of her periods and so on, when she had her last period, at which point of time she says, my last period, my periods began yesterday. And then he says, oh, I can't examine you now. Here's a prescription for a pap test. And he also asks her how many children she has. She says she has 2 children. And then he also tells her about birth control. So this entire sequence is based on the assumption that she's heterosexual and the relationship is with a man. In the second scenario, which unfortunately, again, I couldn't play, the doctor, instead of asking these questions, after asking if she's in a relationship, proceeds to ask, is it with one person or several persons? And she said it's with one person. And then he says, is it a man or a woman? And then she says it's with a woman. And then he asks about the children. And then he asks her, are they your own children or your partner's children, or are they adopted? So then she says that she's not had children before. These are adopted children. Then he goes on to realize that she doesn't need birth control and speak to her just about dental dams and other safer sex between women. And she also is comfortable enough to reveal that she's never had a pap test before, because she's always been scared to go to a gynecologist because of their assumed homophobia. And then she's very comfortable with him, and then she gets a referral for a pap test. So this is the case study, and there are similar case studies for a gay man, a trans man, and for a trans woman. And all of them make the point that the healthcare provider has to let go of their assumptions, not assume that the person is heterosexual or homosexual or bisexual, transgender or cisgender, and ask in a way that's respectful. And then you are able to get not only an accurate history, but you will also be able to do a proper diagnosis of whatever condition they came seeking help for. So I'm going to stop here and request you all to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ramki. That was really knowledgeable. And I was, okay, just a second, there's some problem. Okay. Subrita, you may go ahead with the health issues.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ramki and Dr. Sameera, for sharing all of your experiences and highlighting all the do's and don'ts. So I'm going to cover a little about mental health and how mental health for queer people can also link to physical health. So I'll start with something known as a charmed circle. which talks about how there's a certain kind of sexuality, a certain kind of gender presentation which is accepted in the society. So maybe if I can share this. So if you'll see the picture, in the middle of the picture, it talks about how the people who are heterosexual, who are married, who are in monogamous relationships, who are having sex only for creating children, having children, and in pairs only inside a marital relationship, are the ones who are considered good, normal, and natural by the society. And then there are people at the margins in the outer circle. These are people who are homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, who are unmarried, who might be having sex outside of marriage, who might be having sex for pleasure, who might be having casual sex outside of committed relationships. And this kind of sex is considered, this kind of sexuality is considered bad, it's considered abnormal and unnatural by the society. So the idea is that anyone who is in these margins,
Subrata, we're not able to see the picture.
1 second. I think my screen is a little stuck.
Yeah, Subrita, it has to actually be uploaded, which is, and then you have to play it from within the slide option. So
Okay,
maybe
okay.
you can just speak. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I can just speak. That's fine. So when speaking about charm circle, the idea is that anyone who is on the margins, whose sexuality or whose gender is the kind which is not accepted by the society, which is considered
I guess there's some problem with Subrata's internet. Subrata, are you there? Okay. We'll just wait for Subrata to join, I think. We'll continue.
By the time we can take some questions, right?
Yeah, we can pick questions.
Yeah, there are some questions being put up in the chat. People can take some questions.
Suman, go ahead with the questions.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, so there were a few questions. One of them was, how do you understand if a patient belongs to the LGBTQIA committee, or is it just an inferiority complex?
Okay, who is this for? Yeah.
It's from Shreyas.
Can you tell me loudly what was the question?
How do you understand if someone belongs to the LGBTQIA plus committee, or is it simply an inferiority complex of some kind?
I didn't understand what is that inferiority complex.
Yeah.
Maybe the cross-dressing or something of that sort.
So, can I address this? Yeah. Yeah, I think the question really reveals more about the person asking the question. So why would cross-dressing be considered inferior in the first place, unless there's already a prejudice as an assumption that being male is superior and being masculine is superior? We wouldn't even get to the issue of something being the result of an inferiority complex. So plus the additional thing is, if you're coming out as LGBTIQ, you're subjecting yourself to a lot of stigma and prejudice from society. So why would you just identify yourself as being part of a marginalized group unless that were actually your truth? Why would anyone fake it, knowing that there is so much of stigma and prejudice directed against people who are, of the LGBTIQ community? This is my attempt to understand and respond to the question. Samira, go ahead.
Yeah, it is, it is, as Ramki said it very correctly, that it is, somebody would not like to openly disclose, or the term which is called as typically coming out. That is something which is too personal for any person who belongs to LGBTQI community. Okay, so where telling explicitly to your friend, your family members, or any unrelated or related person, he or she or they should judge that how much amount of safety is being involved in coming out at that particular moment. So definitely that is something which is something which is a very personal choice for that particular person. So unless and until openly somebody says that I identify as this, that, in fact, people around, people make the assumptions that ये तो feminine है, तो probably ये gay होगा. So all these are all wrong assumptions what people have in society going around. That's it. I think Subrita is back again, so we can go back.
Yes, hello. I got disconnected. Yeah. So, should I continue? So people who are on the margins of the charm circle, they face a lot of stress as a result of how society is structured against them. So growing up queer means you're growing up in a lot of isolation because there's no one else you know who is like you. Everywhere around you, there are heterosexual couples. You're attending their marriages, and these marriages are extremely gendered in the way people express their genders over there. You're watching movies which have cisgender heterosexual people and their love. So you don't really know that there are other people around you who are like you. And along with that, you are receiving a lot of messages which are homophobic, which are transphobic. You go to school, you have your friends cracking homophobic jokes, transphobic jokes. You have your families saying similar kinds of things. And then what happens is when you start realizing that on one side you have internalized all of these homophobic, transphobic things, and on the other side you start realizing that I am homosexual, I am bisexual, I am transgender, that leads to an extreme amount of conflict inside a queer person, which can become very hard to navigate. And sometimes also takes over all of their time, energy, and thought processes till they are in a position where they don't have the energy and mind space to focus on anything else in life. So something which is just one part of our lives also becomes so integral and so distress causing. So I'll also share some of my experiences as a queer non-binary person and how that causes stress. So my body is not something that can be read as either male or female because there's a lot of body hair. At the same time, I'm someone who might dress in something which is considered feminine. I have long hair. So when I go out and people see me, they might see my arms or my legs and they see the body hair and they read that as a man's body. And then the next thing they'll see me is my face, which might have makeup on, which has minimal facial hair, which has long hair. And I see their face is changing into confusion. There's expression of disgust, of not knowing what's happening, and these kinds of experiences are an everyday affair for queer people, especially for people who are visible in terms of their gender non-conformity. Having to go through gendered spaces like washrooms, like the security checks in malls, in airports, is an everyday difficulty that queer people are facing. And what that leads to is a lot of stress. Researchers have time and again shown that the stress, anxiety, depression, and all the other mental health difficulties are much higher in queer people than cishet people. Similarly, physical health issues are also higher among queer people. And think of it, if you're constantly undergoing such amount of stress, imagine how much cortisol is being released in your body constantly, and what is that doing to it and to its system, which are constantly focused on these stress responses, and all the other symptoms of the body are not getting that much space to function. And moving on to the medical field, to the mental health field, I think it's very important that what we all start doing as professionals is start reflecting on the field. Because as Ramki has shared, the field also has a history of pathologizing people. Even now, the way DSM is worded, the way ICD is worded, is problematic. So to give you an example, while ICD has now started calling it gender incongruence, and they have also removed it from under the label of disorders, but they still call it conditions under sexual health, conditions related to sexual health. But is it really a condition? Is it really something that is located in the person, or is it something that is located in the society? That the gender dysphoria, gender incongruence, the homophobia is something that is leading to all the things I'm feeling, but not something within me itself. I myself am not someone who has a condition, but the society is the one which has a condition, which we need to talk about. So I think as a field, as professionals, we all need to start reflecting on the kind of language we are using, the kind of systems we have established. As Samira was also bringing up, that there's a letter required to undergo gender transition. So to also then reflect on this system, that why is it that mental health professionals are playing this gatekeeping role, wherein only if I give you that letter, you are going to be able to go and go for transition. So to give you an example, people go for plastic surgeries all the time. Do we send them to mental health professionals that no, you go get a letter, you go get psychometric tests done? So why is it that mental health professionals are playing this kind of a gatekeeping role, having so much power that I can make it or change it for you? So to reflect on these kinds of processes which are there in the system. And when we say that the medical profession has historically been violent towards queer communities, then moving forward, what is it that can we do? So speaking about affirmative action, that like Dr. Ramki and Dr. Samira were saying, we will not know when someone comes to us whether they're queer or not. So it's also up to us to take that ownership, to learn about the systems, to find out what is the kind of language we should be using that is going to make this person feel comfortable, what kind of gender neutral language we can ask. So for instance, asking, do you have a partner, instead of do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? So it's the work that we do on ourselves, which comes under affirmative action. So not waiting that, okay, just because I'm not biased, just because I'm not homophobic, I'll do good work with queer people, but taking it forward. I'm going to learn more, I'm going to educate myself more. And also being involved in advocacy. The medical field, when it has labeled people as disordered for so long, that's a language that people still use. Families still use this language when queer kids come out to them saying that no, this is a disorder. Legal system still uses this language. Trolls on social media are still using this language. So what advocacy work can the medical professionals do Can they keep releasing statements individually and under the name of the organizations that we do not consider this as a disorder? Those are some examples of advocacy work that professionals can do. And moving on a little to also how we take history. Typically, when we take history, we do not ask about mental health unless you're a psychiatrist. And that is a problem because when there are so many stressors, there are also a lot of mental health issues. And when there are mental health issues, there are a lot of physical health issues. And the mental health issues are going to prevent and be a barrier to whether or not the person is going to be able to address their physical health issues. So it's very important that when a person comes to us, ask them how have they been doing lately, have they been experiencing any stress, and how does this stress they are experiencing impact their physical health problems. Ask them about have they been feeling any pains in any part of their body, because that's often how stress manifests. And I'll again share a personal anecdote here. So few years back, I had just shifted to a new city, which was very scary for me. And I'd started, few months after it, I'd started itching all over. The way you do when you get an allergic reaction. And I went to multiple doctors for that, multiple dermatologists, and they were also quite confused. But it was only at the fifth or sixth dermatologist who asked me about my mental health history, who asked me, have there been any major changes in your life recently? And was able to pinpoint that, look, there is no physical marks on your body when you say that there's an allergic reaction. So this is not something, while it is very real that it's itching all over, it's not caused by a physical symptom. This is a stress-related issue, and you need to visit a mental health professional. So those are the cases where we need to really look out for mental health history, that if you see that a person is bringing in some physical health issues which you're not able to explain through all the physical signs and symptoms, ask them, how have they been doing? Have they been to a mental health professional before? Ask them what major changes have they been through in their life lately. This could be things like moving to a new city, losing a loved one, or it could even be a breakup. And a breakup for a queer person is something that can be very intense, because their partner might be the only person who knows that they're queer, only person who knows what their experiences are. So losing that partner is like losing that one support system that you had. And at the same time, also ask them that what support systems do you have? So another example I have is that, so let's say I have diabetes, and I need to work on some lifestyle changes. So, but if I am really stressed, if I'm really depressed, I'm finding it very hard to get out of the bed, I can't make those lifestyle changes. So you need to ask people that, what stress have you been facing? How does it disrupt your physical health related difficulties? What support systems do you have? How can these people help you manage this out? And when you find that people have these kinds of stressors, point them towards mental health professionals, point them towards helplines, towards peer support systems, which is imperative for queer communities, especially because families are not there for support. Families also become a place of violence. And some of the suggestions I have in terms of history taking and in terms of when you meet people, have regular emotional check-ins with them. One way to do that would be print a feelings wheel and keep it on your table, keep it on your desk. Whenever people come in, maybe have a discussion about how have they been feeling lately. See if you find relation with that with their physical health. So these are just some examples, and I'll also share a few instances that I have had with medical doctors. So again, as a non-binary person, when I go to a gynecologist, that's the scariest bit, because if I get a UTI and there is going to be a medical examination, my entire body is going to be visible. And I know that my body doesn't fall into either male or either female, and that can lead to a lot of violence. And this violence need not necessarily be violence which is physical, but even what we call as microaggressions, where people's expressions, the little things that they might say. I might see one of the staff members going back and gossiping with the rest of the staff members. I might see them trying to suppress their laughter. So these are little instances of microaggressions which we need to take care of. So, and these kinds of reasons, these kinds of fears become the reasons why queer people will then delay going to a medical to a medical practitioner. So then affirmative work also looks like reaching out to queer people, letting them know that we will understand. Yeah, and a closing thing that I also want to bring in, that because of all the stressors, queer people are likely to get all the physical health issues at a very young age. So you might find queer people who are diabetic in their 20s or 30s, who have PCOS at a very young age. So it's very important that we also not judge them for having it at this age, because this is what trauma does. This is what stress does. So if you're seeing someone this young having a lot of physical health issues, which we're taught that usually comes at a later age, that's your sign that there might be some stressors, there might be some trauma. Look into it, ask about it, connect this person to a mental health professional, to peer supports, to helplines. So yeah, that's all I wanted to cover, and happy Pride to you all.
We can't hear you.
Okay, I said thank you, Subrata, for your valuable inputs. I wanted to ask Simran, shall we go ahead with the questions? Ramki, Samira, is there anything you want to add?
Nothing from my.
Okay.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Simran, you're not audible.
Sorry. There's a question for Dr. Samira. As both a client and a doctor, how did the whole transformation change you as a person?
My experience as a client first and then a doctor later. Okay. So definitely it was a whole lot of journey for me. Um, First emotion was, as I said it up, that I do not have, as a doctor, my expectations were set quite higher when I am falling into the category as a patient, that whether somebody will talk with me properly or not. See, the point where you put yourself at certain higher level, you think that you are privileged being a doctor. That concept or that thinking just gets shattered when you know that you are a transgender person and you're going to some other setup which is not your kingdom. Okay. So I'll tell you one such example. What happened is, I won't name the institutions. There are three examples I'll tell you. As a transgender person, I mean, trans women, they undergo facial hair removal. Okay, so that is the most commonest gender affirmative procedure as a transgender person I have to undergo. So I started after 3 months of hormone therapy. Started looking for how my facial hairs has to go. The beard has to go off. So I'm staying in Pondicherry, which is around 160 km away from Chennai. Okay, Chennai is the biggest metro city close to Pondicherry, and the facility for all these laser facilities are on all available quite okayish way in Chennai. But being Pondicherry having 6 medical colleges, still they do not have laser facility available. And exactly after 3 years of starting laser therapy from Chennai, I came to know that this facility was available in Pondicherry in one of the teaching institution. So I took a referral from my institute dermatologist, and I went there and I talked with the dermatologist. I went to that particular institution. I was made to sit in the corridor, wait for almost 45 minutes. Okay. And at the end of it, one postgraduate student who is a first year probably, she came and said that Dr. Sameer, yes, I'm Dr. Sameer. Um, yes, my head of the department has said that we cannot do your the laser therapy here because my HOD thinks that if we allow you to undergo laser therapy here, there might be a chance that people like you can start coming here again and again. So it's like I don't think so that we'll be able to take care of you. Okay. I just got shattered. I mean, I was the person who worked in that institution when I started as a junior resident in that institution. And after 10 years, what the hell has happened? That I was denied of my rights to take care of just because I'm undergoing a transition as a transgender person. Okay. I just never looked back at that particular institution. I walked away, tears in my eyes. I literally ran away from those corridors. A similar incident happened when my surgery was planned in Chennai, where my plastic surgeon was working. The institution, it was a teaching institution, and for some good reason, they denied that this doctor cannot get operated in our institution. There'll be a lot of legal hitches. There were no legal hitches. The consent is clear. I am a major, I am an adult person. My surgeon is ready. I have undergone, the whole lot of certification business, and I need have all the right as an adult person to undergo, take a decision to undergo the surgical procedure, and all the things are ready. I was not allowed. uh, then my again second search started one of the corporate hospital, and at the nick of the moment, tomorrow is my surgery posted. I packed my bag. I was staying in Pondicherry to get admitted in the evening, a day prior to surgery, and the surgeon is calling and telling me, Samira, I am so sorry. Um, the unfortunately the hospital administrators have denied, and they are not ready for you to get operated. Okay. So that was a turning point for me, that what makes to have that fear in medical professionals, the hospital administrators, what bothers them, that any transgender clients to come and get operated uh, in these institutions. So that was the first learning point, and I kept it in my background. So I talked with my administrators. Since I was working there, I was at a good position. They were helpful, and these two surgeons, they came to my institutions, and the whole lot of journey happened. So at the end of it, when I was recovering, I talked with Ramki. Look, Ramki, this is what is going on, and this is what had happened, and probably what need to be allied is, and I am at a key position that I am a doctor as well as I am a transgender person who has gone through this hell, and definitely we need to organize in such a way that how and what are the legal fears any doctor has. You need not have to fear. There is a way that a consent has to be taken. Yes, if a person, a transgender identity is out of self declaration, how a medico should know what is that self declaration is, what an affidavit is, what is the format of that affidavit is, when the client comes to the medical institution, what way the consent has to be taken, and what procedure the client undergoes. That's it. This is what has been needed. So this is what was brainstormed out of gender care committee which we formulated. We looked into the literature which is available in India and internationally, the WPATH guideline. Ramki helped quite a lot in building up the resources related to that, and we build up a protocol itself. And now out of this protocol, the administrators got assured very well that they are not going to be in a problem any sort of issues happen, because this is the standard of care for any transgender client who comes in our institution. Any deviations or any effect it happens beyond than this, yes, we are ready to discuss any kind of legal suit happen. This is what is the standard being procured and been made based on the international and national standards, and we are ready to face any such kind of queries. So these kind of fears are being allayed from all the medical professionals who are taking part in gender affirmative procedures within the gender care team. So time to time we meet, we read, we talk, and that's how the knowledge building had happened out of it. So this is what a few examples I can cite about. I hope that clears the doubt of the person who asked this question.
Yes, ma'am. There's another question. Do you think that patients look to you as someone different, and has the transformation affected your medical practice or career?
Okay. Till the day I got admitted for my surgery, I was walking with this ponytail and wearing pant and shirt. And for everyone, I was still till that moment I was Dr. Sameer. Okay, but when I am at home, in front of my spouse and to my community members and very close people around me and few close colleagues, I was Dr. Samira or Samira. Okay. um, with respect to dealing with patients, examining them, dealing with them, my gender issues or looks never mattered. When you are carrying a patient and patient looking at me, nobody discriminated me that I would not like to get touched, or that issue never happened from my patient perspective. Nobody objected on that issue. There were some issues happened in terms of me being a transgender person probably, or looking different, when I had sexual harassment done from the family members. Okay. um, those family members were not related to the patient. Probably they were the troublemakers, which you very well see in the emergency department, where they just want to create issues when the negative outcome happens. Patients' actual family members will sit somewhere else, but those goons, antisocial elements will enter, and that is what once it happened in my ICU, where they physically harassed me, and even during that particular point of time, uh, I very well resisted that moment. I called up the security persons, my colleagues, my postgraduates, my staff nurses, the whole lot of support I had. They were standing behind me at that particular moment. We caught that person, police came, security personnel came on time. We made a FIR launched on that, a proper inquiry happened, and the whole lot of administrators were quite lot supportive at that particular moment. Mind you, even that particular time, I was walking in pant and shirt, okay, and for official reason, I was Dr. Sameer. But for few administrator, core people, like for example, my head of the department and medical superintendent, dean, and vice chancellor of the university, I was a person who was undergoing gender transition. So I had already come out in a very secretive way or in a very personal way to them. So they were quite well aware of it, what journey I am undergoing. So that helped them to help me out at that particular crisis time. So yes, these are the positive and negative impacts it had. But overall, I had a very positive impact. My gender issues, 98 to 99% of time, it did not matter to the patients at all. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. There's a question for the mental health professional. Like, what should be the goal of a mental health professional while dealing with somebody of the LGBTQIA committee?
Okay, so I think goals is always something that as mental health professionals we identify collaboratively with the client. So work with that person. One thing that you should be aware of is that if a queer person is coming to you and you are a mental health professional, they might not always be coming to you for their queerness. It might be just one aspect of their identity, and they might be there for something else. Um, so that is why it's also very important to ask the client what is the goal that they have for themselves. That is one thing. But at the same time, there are some things that you need to be sort of be able to pick up. For example, if there is a person who is dealing with a lot of internalized homophobia, a lot of internalized transphobia, then it will lead to a lot of conflicts for them. It will lead to a lot of difficulty in navigating navigating and trying to figure out what their gender or what their sexual orientation is. And at that time, as a mental health professional, it's very important that you help them sort of build a little bit of acceptance about homosexual and trans gender people in general, and see where that leads to for the person. Constantly reiterate that it's not a person who is wrong, it is the society which is wrong. So if you take the lens of what we have is narrative therapy, it speaks about how there are structures in the society which lead to oppression. Uh, and narrative therapy helps a person to regain control over their story, and it's a strength based therapy. So follow those kinds of systems where you're able to address the self confidence, self esteem which might have been affected as a result of not being like the mainstream, of as a result of being different. uh, Address the issues that might have come as a result of, say, spending so many years navigating their gender and sexual orientation, and as a result, not being able to focus on other aspects of their lives. For instance, what does it mean when you're 21, 22, and you have not been able to get a bachelor's degree because you were facing so much distress because of these things that you couldn't go back to college? Uh, so I think really this is something that varies from person to person, what goals they want to keep for therapy, but keep out an eye for some of the things that people might need help with, might not be able to identify uh, independently. And I think it's also very important to build support systems. So because queer lives are so isolating, try to find out who are the people in this person's life who know about them. Definitely never ever push them to come out to people they are not okay coming out to, because it can lead to violence. But can you help them maybe connect to people who we know are safe? Peer communities, where people run helplines that they can get connected with and discover more about their identities over there. So I hope that covers a bit of that question. Of course, there's a lot more to it.
Um, if a minor comes to a psychiatrist and discovers that he or she is queer, how does the psychiatrist convince their parents that this is not a condition? And if the parents are, conservative people?
Okay. Uh, so I'll start, and I think Ramki and Samira can add on. Uh, so here's where the advocacy work really comes in. You need to be on the side of the child. We operate from the understanding that self-determination is what is important. And if the child is saying that I am trans, then you believe the child, and then you work with the parents slowly and gradually. You help them understand what could be the effect of them not listening to their child now, what kind of mental health issues, what kind of physical health issues it could lead for the child. Give them statistics, give parents the space to explore. So when a parent discovers that the child is not heterosexual, the child is not cisgender, it leads to a lot of difficult emotions within them. You might want to explore those with the parent, that questions of the kind that what kind of life is my child going to have. uh, my child is never going to be able to marry. No one will love my child. So try to identify what are the dilemmas, what are their fears. Try to work through them. Try to give them information, because it's very likely that the parent is also coming in with a lot of misconceptions about gender, about sexuality. Give them the information. And I think just keep in mind that this is a change that's not going to come over one session, but give it multiple sessions. Refer ahead to a queer affirmative therapist if you can, who have the expertise to help them further. Connect them with queer communities who can further support them. Connect them with queer parents, particularly, who have already been through that journey. It can be really affirming, really helpful for a parent to listen to other queer parents. So those are some of the ideas, and if Ramki and Samira would like to add on.
Yeah. So by queer parents, you mean parents of queer people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. No, I agree with everything you say. And I think very often the parents' worry is not so much about their child's non-conformity, but the implications of that on their status in society. What will other people think? What will relatives think? Last week, there was a call from somebody who's actually a commissioner of police, who privately accepted that his child, who's not child, 29 years old, is transgender, but is petrified of what it will mean for his status as a commissioner of police in a state that shall be unnamed, and how to do this. And he said that the only way I can accept my child is if I he misgendered the child and said, if I send him away to another country. So I think a lot of times it is, we have to allay the parents' anxieties about how to manage in the society, and help them prioritize their child's well-being first. Explain to them the consequences of doing something that the child does not want, like, for example, getting the child married or forcing the child to conform to some stereotype. The mental toll and the physical toll, and I think Suvrita did an amazing job of explaining the links between the mental health and the physical health. Explain that to that person and give them time. That's all I have to add. Yeah, go ahead, Samira.
So from my side, two more things to be added. One thing is that in our country specifically, we face the issue about religious issues and religion and gender sexuality. So that as a medicos or mental health professional or health professional, it should not bother. Okay, it should not come. Those enforcement by the family members that our religious beliefs are this, our religious beliefs are that. Okay, do not, or they should not be, the mental health professional should not be entertaining any such kind of request. Second most important thing is, can you convert my child? Okay, that's the most dreadful, unscientific, and pathological request which is often made by families.
When you say convert, you mean convert back to heterosexuality or cisgender, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
We do not want our child to be this way. We want our child to be a normal person, like any other person, going, marrying, having kids, and behaving properly. What the proper way, the bracket, what they have it imagined about it. So trying to convert it back to a heterosexual person, not going in direction of gender transition or opting for homosexuality or homosexual kind of so-called attitude what they have built up in their mind, and that is something which is extremely traumatic for a person who belongs to LGBTIQ community, and that's the biggest stress. um, you cannot change, you cannot do anything what you are actually you are, and you cannot fake yourself. That is something which is a big burden any individual who's belonging to the LGBT community face. Okay, this is what two important point I would like to highlight.
Oh, there's a question for you, Samira. So, how did you first come out,
Can you talk?
and how am I audible?
Yes.
So, when was the first time that you came out, and how did your family accept you, or how did they support you? Like, what made you realize that?
Okay. So, see, my coming out journey is like being a medico. It was like quite screwed up and lots of twists and turns I had it. So I came out to my parents first as a gay man. Okay. So at the age of, I think I was 27, 26 or 27, I guess. So my childhood, I realized that uh, you know in my childhood, at around when I was in fourth or fifth standard, um, I used to be like dressing like a girl, uh, playing with kids, usually indoor games with girls around. And, I was like quite feminine. I used to like to be addressed as a girl in my childhood. And my behavior and inclinations also were quite girly. A confusion started in my mind when I saw my cousin taking bath. Okay, I realized that her genitals are something different than what I have it during that time, and that was the start of confusion for me. In my childhood, I studied in a boys' school. So since I was quite effeminate, boys used to call me in Marathi. There is a word called chimney. Okay, I know people from Maharashtra will realize what is chimney is. It's a sparrow, right? Sparrow meaning some small bird, and it indicates a feminine character. Okay, and I never used to get offended during that time. I was quite comfortable, guys addressing me that way, though I used to get bullied around quite well, and sometimes physically also harassed during my schooling because of the way I used to walk, I used to talk during that time. But in a hidden way, it used to be a pleasure for me, because guys used to address me as a girl. That is what I used to like in that. My parents both were working parents, so nobody used to be at home. So after schooling, the door is shut, and I used to wear my sister's clothes and my mom's clothes, and I used to be queen at my home in my own space around. So this is what all throughout my journey till my teenage, I used to do it up. I used to dance, I used to play, I used to sing, absolutely in a feminine way and gesture. So it happened till the adolescent period where the puberty set in, and the whole lot of changes started. The secondary sexual character started developing. That was quite traumatic. Okay, the voice change, the facial hair growth, and you need to have to behave like a man. Okay, so you cannot walk like a man. You cannot talk like you are not walking like a man, you're not talking like a man, you're not man enough. That had created such a negative impact on me. um, I tried myself to be associated and finding my ways out of my religion, falling into prayers, crying, and that was creating more and more guilt. The adolescent period, I realized that I am more and more attracted towards guys. Okay, that's fine. That is my orientation. But I never realized that inside me, I used to feel that I am a woman who's attracted towards a guy. Definitely, I am not a man. Okay, that moment, yes, I feel like I am a woman inside and attracted towards a man. That aspect I never thought about it. I came to know out of internet 1992. In early 90s, internet got introduced in India, and the early exploration happened through internet, unfortunately through the porn websites, which was absolutely a bad approach to deal with, to learn something. Eventually I learned that the homosexual people are there around. Homosexuality is something true, and through medical books, when I landed up into JIPMER, I realized that American Psychiatry Association has absolutely thrown out, and homosexuality is something which is absolutely normal. So that was a big relief, and I started identifying and identified myself as my sexual orientation as gay till the age of 26, 27. When my marriage issues came, when my parents fixed my marriage, I was away. I came 2003. I came from Pune to Pondicherry, so that was a big relief that I did not have to face my parents. I became financially independent. I tried my best to repulse my marriage, but one point came that um, parents still, because of societal pressure, they still pressurized me to get married. Fortunately, it got broke up, and I took an opportunity to come out. So that was my first point of coming out, because psychologically it was quite a lot distressing me, and by that time I became quite suicidal. Okay, so I took a plunge that event, and that my marriage has broke up, and I told to my father that I am different. I am attracted towards boys, towards men. I feel that I have a woman's heart in me. I did not focus even in during that conversation with my parents that my womanly heart, but I focused that I'm attracted towards guys. So my 50% burden was off. Unfortunately, that burden was taken by my parents, and it took some time for them to get adjusted with that psychological, um, sudden jolt on them. They took some more amount of time. Eventually, the next 2 to 3 days, I still furthermore explored myself. The issues what I had it up. As I said it up, the door is closed, shut, and when I am alone, I am the queen of my world. What about that queen of my world? So more and more literature research I did it off, and I realized that actually I'm having gender issues. What I did it off, and what I think inside is, uh, I am a transgender person, a trans woman. That is what I identified myself. Now the next thing came that I need to undergo gender affirmation, and that's how, as I said, that the search started and my journey started. So when my physical changes started up, eventually my parents realized that physically you are becoming more girlish. What is happening? So I sat in front of them, and I had my second coming out as a transgender person in front of them. And the next emotion or the reaction what they had it up, my father or my mom did not express me when they were in Pondicherry. When they left to Pune, the next call, the second day itself came that my father was crying, and he said that I had only worry that somebody should not abuse you, somebody should not take advantage of you, as you know that what happens with a transgender person. So I had to assure him, and I made sure that all throughout this journey of 8 years of my hormonal transition, I assured him, I made it clear that what is happening with my workplace, with my colleague, with my friends, with my spouse, and what way the support I am gaining, and how that fear what he had it up, that people will take advantage of me, society will not be supportive. I turned it upside down, and that's how they became supportive at the end of it. So they were the strongest pillar when I underwent gender reassignment surgery in my own institution, and all throughout my perioperative care, my mother was taking care of me. So that was the biggest support which I had it up. So this is what I could tell about what the question goes.
Thank you so much. Now there are a few questions for Ramki. Won't taking history by asking if they have relationship with a man or a woman offend the homophobic people?
If you anticipate that, you can leave it open-ended and say, who do you have a relationship with? Or what is the gender of the person you have a relationship with? And remember that there is a sort of unequal status here where the doctor, is in a sense a privilege over the client, and very often doctors are thought to be, like God and so on and so forth. So this is one instance where you can use it to your advantage. But if you think you're dealing with a person who might be responding in a homophobic or transphobic way, just ask an open-ended question. Who are you in a relationship with? Samira or Subrita, do you have any things to add to this?
Can I know the question again?
Yeah. The fear is, if you ask, are you with a man or a woman, a patient who is homophobic might actually get offended at the insinuation, quote unquote, that he might be gay. Yeah. So is it dangerous or is it risky to ask such a question? For which I suggested you ask the question in an open-ended manner.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is, that's the most appropriate way to, deal with the situation. That keeping things quite open.
Yeah. And there's one way to also allay the fears that the person may have that you are homophobic, where you can actually, like, for example, if you are working in STI or HIV or a field like that, you can actually start off with a general preamble saying that, people are of different kinds. Some people have, sex with men. Some people have sex with women. Some people have partners who are transgender. Some people have sex with more than one of the above. Everything is fine. Just to enable me to make provide you better care, would you be open to sharing who are your sexual partners? So, that is something that I've seen people do, and quite effectively so. Yeah. Subrita, you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah. So I also think that this question of being offended could also come from a queer person who still if I am still figuring out my identity, I still have a lot of homophobia inside of me. I might as well be offended that you asked me this question. But at the same time, a doctor who is considered an expert and, like you were saying, often put onto the pedestal of being a god, asking this question in a very normalizing way, it makes a lot of difference. Even for a homophobic person, let's say this homophobic person goes on to have a child who is queer, and remembering that maybe that there was this doctor who asked me this question so casually, so normally, as if it was a very okay thing to be, makes a lot of difference, goes a long way in fighting homophobic ideas and beliefs. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
One more thing I would like to say, it's not just the verbal communication here, when you talk, your non-verbal gestures also carry a lot. How your face is, okay? Somebody asking that question, how are your facial expression at that particular time? Are you suspicious? Are you doubtful? Are you smiling? Are you not smiling? Are you making, what kind of gestures you make it? That's something which is also extremely important at that particular moment.
Right. Any more questions? Yeah.
So somebody asked if there are any helplines that actually deal with issues faced by the community.
Yeah, there are quite a few helplines, and in terms of free helplines, there is the iCall helpline of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, where they have a whole bunch of mental health professionals speaking different languages, and they are definitely queer affirmative and disability affirmative. Apart from that, there are LGBTQ specific helplines, and we can probably send out a list, by WhatsApp, and you can share them with. The attendees. So, for example, Orinum has a helpline, Humsafar has a helpline, Solidarity Foundation in Bangalore has a helpline, Sappho for Equality Kolkata has a helpline, Nazaria Queer Feminist Group in Delhi has a helpline. There are quite a few, and you could just Google LGBTIQ or LGBT helplines, and you should be able to come across a few. There are also 3 websites. One is called vartagensex.org from Kolkata, another one called orinum.net, and another called safeaccess.in that have online directories of LGBTIQ affirming healthcare professionals, mental health professionals, surgeons, endocrinologists, general physicians, etc., etc. And most of these are crowdsourced by community members who have identified professionals that they felt comfortable going to, and with the consent of the professionals have put their name up on the directory. So you can also seek out some professional mental health providers also if you want to. Subrita and Samira, you want to add to this? Okay, next question.
How best can a married person who's in a heterosexual marriage, a married bi person, deal with fidelity issues?
Okay, there is an assumption here that bisexuality implies infidelity, or bisexuality implies cheating on one's partner, or bisexuality implies tendency towards polyamory. I think that the tendency to be monogamous or non-monogamous is independent of sexual orientation. There are heterosexual people who are quite happy being monogamous. There are heterosexual people who want to have multiple relationships, etc. Same with homosexual people, same with bisexual or pansexual people. So a person may have an orientation that is bisexual. It doesn't it doesn't mean that that person is necessarily wanting to go out every time and bend anything that moves. So a person could have a sexual orientation that encompasses more than one gender, but their behavior or their relationship status may be with just one person that they are in a relationship with. So let go of your assumption that someone who is bisexually oriented is necessarily looking to have other relationships outside of their primary relationship. So, but if the person is, and there is a necessity, I think you really need to have open and honest communication with your spouse. But again, this is not just the domain of bisexual people. If a heterosexual person of either gender, one is uncomfortable being in a closed monogamous relationship and wants to open it up, there again, it helps to have an open and honest conversation. And preferably, some of these conversations are best had before one gets into a relationship with one or more people. Yeah. Subrita, Samira, anything to add?
That covers it.
There's a last question. So, could you all state the complications of such surgeries?
Complications of gender reassignment surgeries, right? Okay.
Yes.
So let me tell you a brief about what are those surgeries first. Okay. So typical person who wants to undergoes male to female. Okay. A person who identifies or born with male genitals and identifies as a trans woman undergoes surgery. So typically the surgeries which are undergone by such individuals are vaginoplasty with penile with removal of the penis, and creation of vagina. So vaginoplasty, you call it of that. And where the external genitalia looks very close to the person who has born with a female sex organ. The internal genitalia, you cannot create it. A few people on their choice, they undergo creation of vagina, so you call it as vaginoplasty there. And even clitoroplasty also been created. So that is how the female looking anatomy is been created for trans women. So this is typically genital surgery. Apart from that, there are few non-genital surgeries as a part of gender affirmation procedure also. These trans women would like to undergo, like for example, breast augmentation with the help of prosthesis. Typically, silicone prostheses are being used. Then you have facial feminization surgeries where the cheek modification or forehead, contouring, jaw shaving. Okay, and there is something called as voice surgeries where vocal cords are tightened up to make a very high pitch sound coming out of it. So it will be more feminine voice quality will be obtained with that. So these are the common surgical procedures for transgender women who undergo. While trans men, the surgeries what they have it up is again genital and non-genital surgeries. So typically the genital surgeries, the common term or easy term to use or remember is called as bottom surgery. So bottom surgeries where the internal organs, the uterus and ovaries are taken off. Few people are happy with that, where only the menstruations has been taken care of, along with closure of vaginal wall, where the external genitalia might remain in the same way. If not, they are not happy with that. They would like to undergo furthermore advanced surgeries where the phalloplasty, the clitoris is been the part is been converted into or made into a phallus shaped out of the grafts which are taken from your muscular part, from typically from the ulnar area or from any other part over the lower limbs, where the muscular part has been shaved and the vascularity of that particular part has been maintained, so that it will shape up and wrap it around the urethra to give it the shape of a penis. So that's how the phalloplasty is being done typically in along with creation of the scrotal pouch and implantation of testicular implants in that particular pouch, so that the overall anatomy looks like a male anatomy. This is what typically bottom surgery is to be said for trans men. They undergo as an initial part before taking a decision of bottom surgery. They undergo a decision of top surgery, that is mastectomy, removal of both breasts, and that's how. Uh, Rather than saying it mastectomy, the better word is chest wall reconstruction, where not only the breast tissue is breasts are removed, but the chest wall has been organized and being constructed in such a way that it gives resemblance more of like a male chest. So this is how the surgical procedures happen in trans men. So complications related to that. So when we come across the common complications, what you have is like typically what you have it up in the early phase or during the procedure, the blood loss is something which is very, very important. I'll tell you my example that I lost. My surgery was almost it took 7 hours surgery for me to undergo, and I lost 1.5 liter of blood during that time. It all depends upon how meticulously intricate way the surgeon operate, the surgical time, your pre-operative hemoglobin level, how you bear that surgical stress well. So that's how the your perioperative recovery will be. Typically, the other complications related to the surgical procedure as such is early post-operative period, you might have chances of infections. So genital care is something which is extremely important. So preoperative health, it should start from the preoperative period itself, where the genital skin and hygiene has to be maintained quite well. Um, Early complications is hematoma formation into the labial fold. That is something which is extremely common, where those hematomas can get infected and causes secondary fistula formation, and where the whole of the construction itself loses its anatomical resemblance, what outcome a client is supposed to get out of it. uh, One of the most important complication is urethral stricture in by around 4 to 6 weeks, where the tissue contraction starts happening, where the natural tendency of the body is to close any orifices. So urethral orifice also starts contracting, and that is the period where the client may face an issue with passing urine. If not identified well, and the urethral closure happens, so that is something going to be quite a big challenge for that particular individual. If unnoticed or the caliber is very, very small, um, you might lead to, in subsequent progressive period, the bladder hypertrophy, and if the vesicourethral reflex is inappropriate, bilateral hydronephrosis, and eventually these clients can land up into chronic renal failure, and that is something which is happening unnoticingly to the client. So it is something which is extremely important. Apart from that, if the vaginal pouch has not been created appropriately, intraoperative period, there is always a risk that surgeon might open up, because it's a space which has been created between the bladder and the rectum. So very easily surgeon, if accidentally do not look into the proper separation of these particular tissues, can go up and end up opening bladder anteriorly and rectum posteriorly. So you might land up into unknowingly vesico-vaginal fistula or rectovaginal fistula, and that is something extremely tough to manage, post-operatively. So I told about this one easy and simple way of vaginoplasty. There are other methods and ways also of vaginoplasty, which are depending upon, like colonic graft has been put, or the peritoneal graft has been put. It has its own complications. If you are opening up bowel, related complications also might happen. A very similar complications are there with a transplant surgery, bottom surgery, where they have to undergo 2 sittings or 3 sittings. Sometimes surgical results may not be, the client may not get happy with the surgical results, and similar complications like stricture formation, hematoma formation, then the bleeding, the stress, perioperative stress. So these are all the very common complications you might face in transplant surgeries also. That's it.
Thank you so much, all the panelists. Siddhi, over to you now.
Thanks a lot. Okay. So I, on behalf of IMAMS in Maharashtra and IMAMS in Ghaziabad, extend a very hearty thanks to our panelists, Dr. Sameera, Subrata, and Dr. Ramakrishnan, for speaking to us. We are so grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and experiences. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, as no program can become successful with a single person, so I extend my big thanks to Priyanka and Sohail, members of Maharashtra State Event Team, for their constant help and support. I would also like to extend a special thanks to National Convener Dr. Arvind Swami, and Dr. Rajanish, IMA UP Convener, for the opportunity to collaborate this event with IMAMS in Ghaziabad, Uttar Pradesh. Lastly, I would like to thank the audience. Thank you for taking your time and joining us. I hope you learned something, and I hope this session was useful for you all. That's all for today. We'll meet tomorrow at 7 with IMAMS in Ghaziabad with a new topic and new speakers. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Night.
Night.